So firstly, a disclaimer. You have to have watched everything in Twin Peaks, including all the deleted scenes and those log lady bits before you watch this. Otherwise, you'll be pretty lost in this video. I can't show you clips from the show due to copyright. My apologies in advance. I think I found a good workaround, but just a heads up. So before we get into Twin Peaks itself, let's look at the creators. So Lynch and Frost really quickly. Lynch believes in the unified field, everything is connected. Mark Frost is a H.P. Lovecraft-style occultist, seemingly hyper-aware of Thelema, a cult centered around ceremonial magic and liberty, starting in the early 1900s. The creator of Thelema wrote a book called Moonchild in the 1920s that has the same sigil as the Twin Peaks logo on the cover. If you look at the cover, the sigil in Twin Peaks flips over in Season 2 in Owl Cave, and if you do that and combine those two, you get the cover in Moonchild. The story is about a girl who becomes inhabited by an entity and is later impregnated to create a Moonchild, who is supposed to restore balance in the world and fight darkness. In 1945, somewhat inspired by bomb tests and the direction of World War II and the Manhattan Project, Jack Parsons attempted to recreate this Moonchild. To do this, he frankly jerked off on some stone tablets, while L. Ron Hubbard, the eventual creator of Scientology, wrote down whatever he said. Months later, a woman named Marjorie Cameron appeared at his door, almost like magic, where he proceeded to impregnate her for 2 weeks straight. Some say up to 3 months, as they were in love immediately. She had no clue she was wrapped up in this Babylon working, as Parsons called it, until much later. Sarah Novak, eating the frog moth, could indeed be an analog of this Moonchild as well. Playing the role of Marjorie Cameron, the Moonchild created it would be Laura, who is murdered by Bob in the show. If we follow the plot of the book and the logic of the Moonchild, as so-called prophesized, murdering this character would be like crucifying Jesus, which starts a new Aeon of Horus, aka a new revival of a religious movement. From a pop culture context, we can picture that in the 60s, some stories like this might have been fuel for the hippie movement in the 60s, free love, all of that stuff. It would definitely have been something that would have been top of mind for an artist like David Lynch during his youth. Concurrent with this story based in Thelema, the symbols in the show are consistent with the symbols, rituals, and numbers Thelemites use to interpret and study God and day-to-day life. These are not exclusive to Thelema, but the Moonchild story is. On the left, we see a Thelema altar, and we can see curtains. Sometimes those curtains are red, a checkerboard pattern, different pillars and different astrological symbols being used. We see a rose in the background, some candles, the idea of a lamp as well, an oil lamp, or an electric lamp in the case of Twin Peaks. These are not perfect analogs, but we can see how they are sort of touching upon those ideas somewhat. This altar on the left can also be seen and is recognizable to a Freemason. So if you go to a Masonic lodge, you'd see very much the same thing. Lynch is clearly playing on that idea and making their own worldview and playing off of that. On the left we have the Chariot Tarot card, and on the right we have a shot of Leland going off to a train car to kill his daughter. This may just be a coincidence, but you'll find that there's a lot of this in the show. If you look at the Rider Tarot deck and the Thoth Tarot deck, there's a lot of shots that are similar to this. They could be compositionally very similar coincidences, but something to think about while I build up more evidence through these slides. Cooper's plotline follows the initiation of people in Thelema, But of course, because it's fiction, he's actually killing his shadow literally instead of metaphorically. So he kills Mr. C, he kills Bob, and I won't get into that too much, but just look up the AA initiation structure on Wikipedia. You'll find by the last episode he's going to become the Magus, so that top right 9 degree equals 2 degree sphere over there, that's called Sephiroth. That's just something to look into as well. Again, I gotta build more information and keep stacking it, so just bear with me here. There's a lot to cover. So I mentioned 1945 and a guy jerking off on some rocks. So this isn't the only thing that happened in 1945. It wasn't just Jack Parsons jerking off on some rocks for a moonchild. In 1945, there were also bomb tests where Operation Paperclip sort of was instrumental in those bomb tests or in the Manhattan Project. Operation Paperclip is a U.S. operation where they took Nazi scientists and brought them over to the United States instead of them going to the Nuremberg trials. The deal was struck basically so the U.S. could get an atomic weapon before anyone else. There's other people online who talk about this more, so I'll be ignoring a lot of this. All I'm trying to say is the creation of this new Aeon could have happened just not because of Jack Parsons. It could have very well just been the atomic bomb as you saw it in part 8 of season 3. The Gematria for the Woodsman, Operation Paperclip, and Atomic Bomb all somewhat align. There's also like King Fire and cockroaches that, and I think like apocalypse, like all of those words in Gematria result in the same number. And those numbers, if they're all associated, are supposed to be sort of spiritually associated. I'll get into it a little bit more later, but if you're a big fan of Gematria, just check out Operation Paperclip and see if there's any word associations you can find. Really, that's a fun afternoon if you're the type of guy to play with a calculator all day. In addition to the bomb tests, Jack Parsons, another big discovery happened that I believe is referenced in Twin Peaks. The Nag Hammadi Library was discovered. The Nag Hammadi Library was basically a discovery of new early Christian scripture dating back to the 4th century that contradicts a lot of Catholic beliefs today, and was very likely squashed by the early Catholic Church to enforce more patriarchal values back then. I won't get into it, but it is fundamentally a Gnostic body or collection of texts. I use the word Gnostic very broadly here, but the idea is this is sort of another thing happening in 1945. And, Twin Peaks is sort of being all of these things at the same time. And that's sort of the thesis of this video here. This is an occult piece, but it's also many other things happening. And so if you see a criterion of Twin Peaks that is just as valid given sort of my standard of proof, then that's great. We have a great piece of work, much like Shakespeare, that we get to sort of trade ideas about. So anyway, not trying to tell anyone that they're wrong or, postmodernism is a mess. I'm not trying to say that. But yeah, something to think about. I'll elaborate on this a little bit more later. So one of the scripts in the Nag Hammadi Library was the Gospel of Philip. It matches the vision Philip has in the director's cut of the movie, the Blue Rose edition. And the top of the convenience store in his vision replaces the temple in the script, where he sees it's both a throne for the Chalfonts and a bridal chamber for Bob. The whole thing screams sex magic, and because Thelema's sex magic preceded the discovery of the script, it sort of looks like Thelema is prophetic when looking at the Nag Hammadi Library, even though it's more of a historical coincidence. Sex magic had existed before Thelema, after Thelema. It's just how it is. It's just a part of esotericism. This is the temple referenced in the Gospel of Philip, and I won't get into this too much, but basically you have different rooms within the temple that bring you to different places. So if we look at the waiting rooms, or the red rooms, or the Black Lodge, whatever you want to call it, where Cooper is waiting for 25 years, you can see that there are different sections of that place or of the convenience store that put you into different sections of faith. So you have a courtyard, you have an altar of sacrifice. Within that, you have a holy place. And then beyond that, beyond a curtain, you have Holy of Holies, which is basically a bridal chamber. Either people are getting married there. Some people take it as a place where it's a sort of a throne room for God. So it's sort of where priests hang out to try and talk to God. And they're doing their own sort of secret things within the Israelite temple. Again, I'm really oversimplifying things, and I'm ignoring a ton of discourse, but that is the general idea. So next we're going to get into Gematria. If you don't like numbers, it's okay. It's sort of a pseudo math. So Gematria is a general concept where basically we take letters and turn them into numbers and then add up those numbers or sum those numbers to create a final number where that number can then correspond to other words that added up to the same number. So Twin Peaks often looks at an English Gematria system where we use the simple Latin alphabet. And when two words numbers match, then we call that a collision. So if something is 666, in popular culture we call that the mark of the beast or the devil. There's lots of little things or lots of words that match that are understood to be satanic in popular culture. This sort of is the system underlying that, and we see that in Twin Peaks a lot. So I'll get into some examples. So to start, we have Laurel Palmer in the Standard English Gematria. So the Standard English is the right column. In the first row, that's Laura Palmer, and that is 708. So 708 in the show, without even looking at collisions, is going to be the address of the Palmer house. It's 708 on 33rd Street. So already then we're seeing that that Laura Palmer has some association just with this house in general. 708 is also the Gematria of Twin Peaks itself. So you could say that Laura is the whole town. If we jump from Hebrew Gematria to English Gematria between Carrie Page and Laura Palmer, we get a similar number, 498. The number 498, or sort of 400 and then a 98, has its own connotations. I don't really want to get into weeds with that, but the fact that they equal the same thing is the important part for this video. But Carrie Page's home is not 498. Carrie Page's home number is 1516. So why is 1516 important? What does that collide with? It collides with the publishing year of the first translation from Hebrew into the Latin alphabet, the Tree of Life. The Tree of Life is I'll get into it later, but it's basically the entire basis of Gematria. It's very heavily based on that in esotericism and Hermetic philosophy, and then therefore Thelema as well. So when people say, hey, when Cooper asks, what year is this? We could say, oh, maybe it's 1516. I know that's nuts, but we'll get into more proofs and you'll start smoking banana peels just like me. Odessa, Texas, or Odessa, is the same number between Hebrew and Standard English as the word coffee. Now, that's sort of a weird coincidence, but if you think about it, season 2, we had Laura in a cup of coffee. So it is as if Odessa is the cup of coffee, and when Cooper goes into that new world with Judy's diner in the final episode, we're actually in coffee. We're in this sort of black abyss, or whatever symbolism you sort of associate with coffee in the show. Sarah Novak matches the word pain and suffering, or Garmonbosia, and so creamed corn is sort of now Sarah Novak. Sarah Novak, of course, is the maiden name of Laura Palmer's mom. I won't get into that. I think that's just a weird coincidence. A lot of these are sort of open to interpretation. I'll show you that these collisions are actually super rare. And so when they do happen, they're sort of worth calling out. But, some of them, they're kind of dead ends, and this is one of them. Another one is the Dreamer and Laura. So we ask, hey, who's the Dreamer in the show? Well, Laura and the Dreamer also match. Again, these are words from 1 to 1,000 and they match. It's just a little odd. Does that mean Laura's the Dreamer? Sort of hard to say, but something to think about. I think it's sort of valid. But let's continue on and you can make your own conclusions by the end of the video. So Hebrew and English Gematria are not the only systems of Gematria to use in Twin Peaks. There's many others. There's a Greek one. There's just a lot. I think the third system that is applicable, at least only considering the final episode, I believe, is this one called English Kabbalah. It's basically just another system where letters equal numbers, and those numbers are just a little bit different. We'll see in the show some other collisions, and you can sort of draw your own conclusion if that's worth doing. This one is important, though, because it matches Thelema exclusively, and it's sort of for Thelema. There was a riddle in sort of the Thelema Bible, which is solved by this Gematria system. And so if anything is sort of working out in Twin Peaks for that, it sort of means that this is, at least with respect to Gematria, sometimes a Thelemic text. I'm sure there's Hindu stuff in there too, but we'll see that it fits Thelema or the Freemasons as well. So I mentioned before Laura lives on 33rd Street, 708 33rd Street, and we see that that's the street name. We see that Laura is 33. Judy is 54, and that matches Novak, the maiden name of Sarah Palmer, Laura's mother. And so if you say, who's Judy, it's sort of like saying, who's Novak? Perhaps a matriarchal lineage is implied as Judy. Judy's a female name. It could still be all of your theories of what Judy is, right? So I'll get into that later, who's Judy. But just, again, something to think about as we go forward. Additionally, Pale Horse and Chemicals also match. So Pale Horse is the white horse. Of course, the white horse that Death rides comes to mind when we look at Pale Horse or the Apocalypse, which sort of looms over the entire show somewhat. Chemicals I have in here because there's a line with Mike, without chemicals he points. And I am of the belief that the Pale Horse is actually what's keeping Sarah Palmer quiet and not telling the cops about anything going on with Leland or, any sort of supernatural activity. If you look at Sarah Palmer's scenes and when she sees the Pale Horse, that might be the case. Again, something to think about. I'm not going to dive too much. We have too much work to do. And yes, the 33. Yeah. So these are going to be just English collisions. So not English Kabbalah, but the simple English one. I believe that this is much more common, and much more common in terms of it's just a simpler form of Gematria. It's like A equals 1, B equals 2. It's very easy to do in shorthand. So you can picture in the 90s, you don't really have a computer, or you do have a computer, but it's really complicated to use. if you're writing a show, you're probably going to lead on the easier Gematria to use for your native language, which would be English. And so you end up finding that that is very common. There are some Hebrew Gematria collisions, and I'm going to show them, but there's so much fewer. It's the same words. I have like 300 words or phrases, names that I have for the Gematria. I automated it. I'm not crazily typing all of these in individually and doing the math and mapping them all. I'm getting a computer to do this. But the volume of these collisions is quite interesting. So let's get into it. I'm just going to list them out. So arm, Leo, and deer all match. Again, maybe a dead end, maybe not. Mike and fire match. That's cool. You can also notice that in the English Kabbalah, that also matches. So Mike and fire is 78 in the English Kabbalah, and standard English is 228. So that's something to think about. Linda and coffee, so 240. Those match. Donna, KPJK, Ring, and James match. So KPJK is the radio station in part 8 that the woodsman speaks into or broadcasts out of to put everyone to sleep. And ring, I assume, is the ringing, or perhaps the ring itself, that emerald ring that seems to be an important plot device. Something to think about. I think the jury's still out. Odessa and the word witch match. Nui and dreamer, thelema, all match. These three are all thelemic terms. They all just sort of fit together because it's important in thelema for those things to fit together. Palmer, the arm, Palmer and the arm match. So sort of Sarah Palmer, or I guess Leland Palmer, and the arm matching it, sort of representing a sort of patriarchal force of evil, potentially, versus Novak and Judy. Novak and fireman also match, which I don't quite understand, but I think there is a dichotomous relationship between fireman and Judy. So I think that's perhaps what's going on here, is sort of an evil doppelganger of the fireman and Judy. Again, more collisions. The fact that there's so many in English is bananas. So owls, Martell, Cameron, and Muffin. So the important one is Muffin. So Laura says, I'm the Muffin in Fire Walk With Me. So it's like, I'm owls. It's sort of like saying that if you really want it to, because the numbers match. I'll get more into that later, but just something to think about. Maybe Laura is an owl. The owls are not what they seem. Maybe they are people, right, that transform into animals. Not completely unheard of in mythology. Unheard of in Twin Peaks, but, lots of weird stuff happens there. Cooper and Black Lodge match. Log Lady and Bunny. Flower and Chalfont. There's a lot of flower symbolism in the show, and Chalfont, of course, is that old creepy lady in Fire Walk With Me and season 2 and all that, and he has that little boy Pierre, the old lady that freaked out Donna on the Meals on Wheels thing, if that sparks your memory. Again, the owl, monkey. Do what you want with monkey. I don't know if that's gonna solve anything in Twin Peaks, but we have that blue monkey there. It's something to think about. Bad Bunny and Carrie Page, those all match. So again, we see Carrie Page and the owl matching, and we have the question, is it about the bunny? I know it's a joke, but that does show up in the Gematria a few times. And so sort of Laura got killed around Easter seasonally, or at least during the season change that Easter would represent. And so is it about the bunny? Is Easter about the bunny? I don't know. It's really not. But, we see Playboy bunnies in the show, and at One-Eyed Jack's, and Laura was at One-Eyed Jack's. There's sort of something going on there, potentially, if you feel like drawing those lines. Red Rose and the Giant, those match. So the blue rose is the unnatural rose. The red rose would therefore be the natural rose. And the Giant matching, I think that's pretty good for Season 2 Gematria. Truman and Justice, those two match. I think that just semantically makes sense. Maybe Truman had a longer arc, but that's good. Hurley and Tremont also match, which is bizarre. I don't know, maybe Hurley had a larger arc that would have been explored if Season 2 or 3 or whatever, they never solved the mystery. I don't know. Maybe this is just a coincidence. Just bizarre. Dale Cooper and Diane Evans match, so that's good. Maybe they're meant to be together or something like that. The Standard English and English Kabbalah match there, so that's nice. That kind of means it's super intentional, in my opinion. Blue Rose and the Dreamer match, I think that's fair. Blue Rose is elusive, and it's really all about the Dreamer. Semantically, that just makes sense in my head. Sycamore, which is the tree, Pale Horse, Creamed Corn, and the Fireman all match. You can think about why those might all be related. But yeah. And, if they're opposites, then that could be something as well, right? Because we have those evil doppelgangers, or just sort of doppelgangers in general, to think about. Okay, again, the Owls. Parsons, as in Jack Parsons, David Lynch, and the Muffin. Those guys match. The Owls and Parsons, they match in English Kabbalah. That is interesting, because if we think about the lineage of the Moonchild, it would be a Parson under the patriarchy, right? Under the patriarchal name, I should say. Woodsman, How's Annie, Gordon Cole, White Lodge, all of those words match. So Woodsman and White Lodge, interesting. Yeah, you can sit and think about those. Maybe nothing there, but we'll see. Sarah Palmer and Josie Packard match. I think Josie Packard was supposed to have a larger sort of evil villainous arc. She has a lot of symbolism early in the show in Season 1 that implies that she is sort of a Venus goddess or huntress goddess. The first shot of her is with some black dogs, and she's still a love interest, so being a seductress is sort of part of that huntress magic. But the actress for Josie Packard did ask to be written out of the show, and so that maybe never got realized. So that's interesting. Okay, even more. So Sarah Novak and Leland Palmer match, just like Diane Evans and Dale Cooper. The English Kabbalah does not match with those, but at least the Standard English one does. Also, the Great Went. So the large bar owner, I think his name's Jacques or Renault, one of the Renault brothers, says that he's the Great Went after Laura says that she's the Muffin. So if he says I'm the Great Went, maybe it's Sarah Novak and Leland Palmer sort of combined or something, or if Laura is trying to avoid Bob or sort of the evil of her parents by going to this bar and having sex with one of the Renault brothers, perhaps when he says I'm the Great Went, it's like, I'm still your parents, like you can't avoid me, because Bob is still in the air with those guys. because Bob, spoiler, does eventually kill Laurel Palmer. Again, something to think about. Good Bunny, Sacred Mound, and One-Eyed Jacks all match. Sacred Mound is Gordon Cole is talking to Tammy and points to a ring finger and says, "Hey, that's the Sacred Mound. You think about that one, Tammy." So there's something there. I think the fact that it only matches Good Bunny and One-Eyed Jacks is all kind of odd. Jackrabbit's Palace and Good Bunny, is a Jack and a Bunny related? I don't know. Again, you got to think about it. Maybe there's more work to be done here. I'm done with these, like doing the math for them and interpreting them. This is what I found. I am done. And again, I have a GitHub of all of this stuff. So if you want to continue this work, go for it. Contribute to the GitHub. But there's enough here for me to say I'm out. I've gotten what I need out of it, at least for now. Maybe in a year I'll make another video or something. But yeah. 708. So the last three: Hollister, Sarah Palmer, and Twin Peaks. Those all match. Hollister is a love interest associated with the biography of Jack Parsons. Not a huge deal, but yeah. Anyway. Oh my god, more English collisions. So here's the deal. I'm showing you all these English collisions because there are so few Hebrew collisions. And so it has to be intentional because there's numbers in the show that are very important, seemingly, just in terms of cinematography, like film language. And there's all these associations here. So again, look this up later on the GitHub. But yeah, I'm just walking you through these now. Garland Briggs and Wyndham Earl match. So that's an interesting sort of dichotomy. Yeah, something to think about. Also, their Hebrew Gematria is very close. Garland Briggs and Alice Tremont. So that's 347, 348. It's just a little odd that it's that close in Hebrew Gematria. And they all match. So in English Gematria at 714. So is Alice Tremont the sort of woman at the final episode that answers the door of the Palmer house? Is she Wyndham Earl? Is she Garland Briggs? I think that's a bit of a mystery. Is she a shapeshifter? I'm going to talk more about who Garland Briggs is, or what he represents in Thelema, symbolically, at least the parallels with the show and Thelema in general. 720, we have Richard and Linda and the word doppelganger. So Richard and Linda are the sort of new names of Diane and Cooper. So just sort of saying that, your significant other is a doppelganger, or Richard and Linda are doppelgangers. That's something to think about. Mark Frost, Garmin Bozia, and Richard Horn all match. I think there was a sort of Gematria idea of the brothers Horn being Bob or something like that just was never realized, but they had to start picking sort of names up and stuff like that. But like the Horn and the Horn brothers, they pop up a lot, when we're trying to figure out through Gematria who Judy is, and it's a little bizarre. But we'll get into that later. Percolator and Blue Monkey also fit. So there's a fish in the percolator, there's a fish in the Blue Monkey. I don't know. I mean, if you watched the show or the short, What Did Jack Do? You can think about that monkey all day. All right. Guy's a chicken banging monkey. I don't know. I do know. I do have some ideas, but I'll talk about it later. Look up the Blue Ape of Thoth, and that is a blue monkey, and it's a messenger god. Just look into that. Think about it. It's associated with the Magus tarot card, I believe. So yeah, again, maybe I'll talk about that later. Keep watching, subscribe. I don't know. This is just a little hobby project. So, oh my god, even more. Holy shit. Okay, so Donna Hayward and Benjamin Horne match, which is like, Benjamin Horne is Donna Hayward's dad, right? Allegedly, right? So that's later revealed. So something to think about. Mrs. Chalfont electricity match. So if electricity is doing anything, maybe that is Mrs. Chalfont up to some no good. Milk and Cookies and White Lodge match. Milk and Cookies is odd, but Laura brings it up briefly in a recording with the therapist character, like one of the cassette tapes, like, oh, mom has milk and cookies. Yeah. Don't read into that one too much. Pierre Tremond and Philip Jeffries match, which I cannot see how, but you know, that's something. Sarah Judith Novak and The Question, What Year Is This? Both match, and they are both 1110, so 111. That's important. The English Kabbalah numbers are very close together. And then in Hebrew Gematria, where, you know, the address for 1516 was indicated as a year, we get 1905, which is a sort of a birth year for a new Aeon in Thelema. And that's when Thelema started with Aleister Crowley. And what year is this? That question in Hebrew Gematria is 1801. I don't have anything on 1801. I don't know anything about it. I haven't looked into it either, because 1905 is so satisfactory as an answer, honestly. The new Aeon started in 1905 because that's when Thelema started. So, anyway, something to think about again. So yeah, again, Hebrew Gematria, not a lot of associations at all compared to the English Gematria. So we have Bob and Mike, Richard and Engine Oil, Linda and Pi, Pierre and the Fool, Tremond and Gordon Cole, Log Lady and Catherine Martell, Owls and Dougie Jones, Odessa and Kettle, Arm and Cocaine. So Bob and Mike I get. Richard and Engine Oil, maybe. Linda and Pi, that's odd. Pierre and the Fool actually makes a little bit of sense, somewhat, because if you look at the Fool tarot card and what it represents, and Pierre is definitely a Magus of Power. If you go to Liber 777 and look up the Magus of Power, it sort of describes Pierre, but yeah, just something to think about. Tremond and Gordon Cole, that is just, I think that's a weird collision, because I think Tremond in English Gematria was colliding with James Hurley. So I think if their true name is Chalfont, and that actually tells us what's going on, and then they change their name to Tremond, it's sort of an obfuscation if we're looking at the Gematria, sort of a leading us down the wrong path. That could potentially be the case. More on, Mrs. Chalfont representing Bina, maybe a little bit later, but I think that's sort of what's going on there. And if that doesn't make sense, that's fine. We can just move on. Again, these are all the English Kabbalah descriptions. I'm not going to show you the numbers, just because going through the English simple Gematria was exhausting. So Donna and Hayward match, sure. Linda and Mr. C, right? So Richard and Linda, they match. And Richard and Linda match with Doppelganger. Rose and Odessa. So if we look at Odessa, it represents coffee, but then also Rose. Rose is sort of a goal or a holy grail at the end of, your King Arthur style trip. So, Dale Cooper going through a sort of an archetypal hero's journey. Now he gets the rose. or goes to Odessa to find Laura Palmer, right? Novak and Judy match. I think we already covered that. Ring and KPJK. That, we already talked about that. Babylon, so the Babylon working. The Owl and Water match. Deer, Packard, and James. Palmer, the Arm, and the Fool. Black Lodge and the Question, How's Annie? Coffee, Washington. So, when Carrie Page asks Cooper, where are we going? He says Washington. He goes Washington State or Washington, D.C. There's a lot of gematria between Washington State and Washington, D.C. And what those associations could mean. I'm not going to get into that too much, but it's an interesting exchange in dialogue in gematria. Chemicals, Pale Horse, and Bad Bunny. We already talked about those. Tremond, Mark Frost, Jack Parsons, Kettle, Garland Briggs, and Percolator. Sarah Palmer and Duck Eye. So Duck Eye is a term used by Lynch to basically describe the entire plot of a movie via a obscure scene that is seemingly unrelated to the movie. So sort of Sarah Palmer being seemingly unrelated to Who's Judy or the mystery of Twin Peaks in general, sort of adds up here if we look at this gematria. Muffin and Good Bunny match. So that's weird because I think we were thinking that Carrie Page was a bad bunny and Laura is the muffin. She's the good bunny. Again, think about those bunnies or don't. The Ring and Blue Rose match. Pierre and Justice. So Justice is the ruler of the new Aeon, and Pierre kind of acts like he runs the show. So I think this this logically makes sense. Dale Cooper, Diane Evans, and Insurance all match. The fact that Dougie Jones works in insurance is sort of neat. Garmin Bosia and Washington, D.C. So it's like, hey, we're going to Washington. Carrie Page says Washington, D.C. So it's like, we're going to Garmin Bosia. Then he says, no, state. So at the bottom here we say Washington State. So the second column, very bottom, we have sycamore tree associated with Washington State. So it's like, are we going to Garmin Bosia? He goes, no, we're going to Washington State. Carrie Page seems like an evil person. She just supposedly murdered someone in her house, right? And is probably like a bit of a witch who hunts and kills things, and people are after her. So, yeah, I think Carrie Page is a lot more evil than we understand her to be. And is, one of those evil doppelgangers. Sacred Mound and the Book of the Law. The Book of the Law is like the Bible of Thelema. So it's like the ring finger is the Book of the Law. I don't know. Something to think about. White Lodge and Twin Peaks. Those both match, so that's cool. Richard and Linda and Audrey Horne all match, which is, that's weird. Carrie Page, Creamed Corn, and Jesus Christ match. The Dreamer, Cherry Pie, and Blue Monkey. So again, the Blue Monkey is the monkey that says Judy at the end of Fire Rock With Me. The Muffin and Steli Riju match. Steli Riju is a Thelema term. It sort of is a way of saying your guardian angel. That I'm not being completely honest when I say that or accurate, but that is generally the idea. You can look up the Wikipedia page and go down that whole rabbit hole if you'd like. The Fireman and Sarah Judith Novak match. I think we already went through that. Did You Find Him and White Lodge. So again, Cooper knocks on the door. Carrie Page notices that it's an FBI agent. She says, did you find him? And it's sort of like saying White Lodge? Perhaps? I don't know. Anyway, and then again, Sycamore Tree in Washington State. So that last episode dialogue is interesting between Carrie Page and Dale Cooper with respect to Gematria. But again, it's so loose and so harebrained, I cannot put my name on it. But by all means, take a look and smoke your banana peels, because I certainly did, and it was fun. The last big head-scratcher before we end is the owls. Owls and Muffin both match in Simple English Gematria. The Muffin and the owls both match in English Kabbalah as well. And finally, the owl matches Laura Palmer's Hebrew Gematria, which, like Carrie Page, Bad Bunny, and Monkey, all sort of seemingly have some associations with Laura. Laura at night is, as far as I am concerned, manifesting at times an owl in some supernatural way. In mythology, the screeching owl is associated with Ishtar, a powerful goddess in the Babylonian Empire, among other places. This goddess, if you browse around Wikipedia, technically, arguably, is related in some way to most powerful mythological women in the sort of religious canon that isn't Islam. Some would argue that before the Abrahamic religions, people were mostly worshipping an Ishtar of some sort. In Judaism, however, we get Lilith. Lilith is a equivalent to Ishtar, arguably, and also happens to be a screeching owl in some translations of the First Testament. She was the first wife of Adam, but basically didn't want to be a submissive tradwife, chained to the kitchen. So she was kicked out of Eden. This goddess lineage maps well with the Moonchild, as described in the book and the Babylon work. I won't go into the full canon about Lilith, but she is generally a violent, vengeful, but also sometimes helpful to some, and symbolizes fertility, in addition to political power. Ishtar's mother is a woman named Ningal, who is known for grieving the loss of the city named that fell seemingly to apocalypse in roughly 1940 BC. Again, that is an inverse of the bomb test in 1945 AD. The history of and the mythology of Ishtar can at times map well to Sarah and Laura Palmer. I won't go into details because it's not my area of expertise, but it likely explains the reverse sequences in Twin Peaks. As AD years increment, BC years decrease. There is a city that has two peaks in the Middle East that matches this mythological canon, Ningal and and Ishtar. But again, you gotta sift through those conflicting historical dates yourself to find it, and I'm here for the questions you already had before this video and not the questions you have after this video. Also, I am certain there's lots of valid theories about the backwardness of the Red Lodge dialogue. This is just one of them. Again, I think they're all equally valid, and the more that work, the more interesting the show is historically as a body of work. When Cooper says what year is this in the final episode, the question now has more complexity than previously thought. Not only can the matriarchal goddesses we have been talking about have the power to remove memories, but genuinely, if everything is historically repeating itself, then time has no meaning, which, by the way, is one of the lessons you need to learn in ceremony to get to the next level Cooper is trying to ascend to in Thelema. When Sarah yells Laura in the final episode, she is perhaps calling her daughter as an old goddess, and then Laura replies, "It's the scream of Lilith, a screeching owl." She is calling back to her mother like a screeching owl would. Again, mythology is hazy and rarely concise, but coupled with the Gematria and the matching sigil of Moonchild, and where Cooper is in his ceremony, which is going to have to be explained in another video, the initiation of the Golden Dawn or the AA, we can sort of see where some lines can be drawn. Now that we have figured out what just happened at the end of the show, we can now ask what happens after the final episode. Now, this is purely speculative, and, we could have a fourth season of Twin Peaks, but obviously that's not going to happen. And so I'm just going to sit around and sort of speculate, and there's no way to prove me wrong. What are you going to do? So Cooper, I think, becomes likely someone similar to Pierre, what is understood as a magus. When Laura's whispering into his ear, he is likely learning about being a magus. Laura, who is crucified, is probably telling Cooper what to do, like in the Book of Jeu. So again, the Gematria of Laura matches the Stele of Jeu, which is the Jeu in the Book of Jeu. And the Book of Jeu is a Gnostic text where Jesus explicitly tells his disciples what to do to have success in the afterlife. The later half of the book is lost to time, and coincidentally, this is also the case in Twin Peaks. We don't get to hear Laura's whispers. Another mention of Jeu, the Stele of Jeu, for the record, is a headless guardian angel, which I think Major Garland Briggs was an analog of in the final season. Because he didn't have a head. There's other ways to murder people, but, off with his head. That doesn't answer any questions directly, but again, more Thelema examples to drive this point home. Of course, when I say Thelema, it could also be Gnostic, but I digress. What happens to Laura after the show is however you interpret Ishtar. There's arguments to be made that Ishtar is a Christian analog of Lilith, who was damned to watch her daughters die constantly in some scripture. Perhaps Sarah Palmer is doomed to watch her daughter die constantly, therefore, in the next life. The mother-daughter dynamic and the young and old self fighting constantly is also another theme surrounding the broadest definition of Ishtar possible. The mother and daughter being somehow the same person in conflict in a woman's psyche is another popular idea that people apply to Ishtar. The Babylon work by Jack Parsons did get Cameron pregnant, but she secretly got an abortion after finding out that the Babylon work was sort of this, weird culty thing that she didn't know about. She just said, yeah, I'm going to New York, and just kind of left and got an abortion. Lynch's Eraserhead is about an abortion. So this is not too far off to say that as a potential theory, this is sort of about an abortion happening. Lilith is also described as a tree, if not an owl. Perhaps the mill in Twin Peaks represents the cyclical nature of Laura dying, further reinforcing this endless murder cycle of Sarah Palmer's daughter. If not also an analogy for the Holocaust, as people mention online very much. What with the Horsemen what with the Woodsman and Operation Paperclip. It also draws this weird line between Josie and Sarah in the Gematria, and joining those back together, as I had previously mentioned in the tables. The actress for Josie requested to be written out of the show, so perhaps that never got explored, and turning her into furniture was perhaps a way to sort of cheaply allude to all of this. The world Cooper left likely was destroyed. It's sort of understood that for the world to get a new magus, the world has to end before becoming reborn. It's not necessarily true that the world ended, but Mark Frost has said in the past that Judy was an ancient, forgotten goddess who, if married a god named Baal, would trigger the apocalypse. I think Ishtar tracks well with an ancient, forgotten goddess. You might have not known Ishtar before this video, which tracks well with Sarah marrying Bob, aka Leland. The white horse being the last horse of the apocalypse, death, also tracks well with this idea. Therefore, the apocalypse probably does occur at the end of the show, and it's reborn into a new aeon, somewhat controlled by Cooper instead of, say, Pierre. Again, it's arguable. I mentioned the word bunny earlier in the video. I know it's a meme to say that it's about the bunny regarding Twin Peaks. I think Hawk's line is a reference to a 1853 pamphlet called The Two Babylons. Laura was murdered and resurrected as Maddie around Easter, and this pamphlet said that Ishtar, because of its phonetic similarity to Eastar, made it a pagan holiday. disguised as a Catholic one, which, of course, the Catholic Church denied because they don't want to sound like they're pagan. Also because there is no relationship. Again, something for you to think about. I suspect that scene could be many things at once, and not just that, but it's sort of like asking, is Easter about the bunny? Is Easter about Babylon? It's sort of a joke amongst people who study theology, kind of like the principal and the librarian trying to do magic without being properly initiated in season 3. Or Jerry Horn getting too high in the woods. I'll talk about Jerry Horn in another video, by the way. I know Twin Peaks mentions Eastern spirituality a lot, and so saying Thelema is a perfect explainer for everything in Twin Peaks is, of course, reductive. Surely there's many religions that were referenced in Twin Peaks, but you and I both know in the 20th century there was a time of discovering archetypes with what cultures we knew of at the time, and Thelema did this. If you look at Libra 777, you will see Crowley mapping ideas in the I Ching, ideas from Buddhism, and ideas from Hinduism, all under his system of knowledge. It's quite a feat, even if he did make some historical errors, but all that to say, there's undoubtedly many, many ways of interpreting Twin Peaks. I just think it's Thelema that is the primary explainer, philosophically or theologically, because of some explicit references that I personally see. And I've shown you a little bit of. There's a ton more, but those are the easiest to explain. People are still finding ways to interpret Shakespeare after all. I am sure I'm missing something here, but that's why I'm making more than one video. There's lots more I can There's lots more I can explain in Twin Peaks. For example, we haven't talked about the tarot cards at all, or even why 10 is the number of completion. With that said, though, maybe subscribe or don't. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Alright, thanks folks. 93.